The Russia-Ukraine war once again brings us new reports from the front lines. This time, the story comes from the Dnipropetrovsk region, an area that has been under repeated artillery fire almost every week. According to Russian sources, the Vostok Group claims that their MLRS Grad rocket crews struck a temporary Ukrainian military position, inflicting significant damage. Now, claims like these surface all the time, but behind every headline, there's always more to unpack. What exactly is the Grad system, and why is it so feared? Who are the Vostok troops, and why are they so often highlighted in Russian reports? How do Moscow and Kiev portray these events so differently? And most importantly, what does all this mean for civilians caught in the middle? Let's break it down. Before diving into the claim itself, let's take a look at the weapon at the center of this story. The Grad, officially known as the BM-21, is a multiple-launch rocket system developed by the Soviet Union during the Cold War. Despite being decades old, it's still one of the most widely used artillery systems in modern warfare. Imagine this. A single Grad vehicle carries 4,100 22mm rockets. Within less than half a minute, all 40 can be fired in rapid succession, saturating a massive area with explosives. This isn't about precision, it's about overwhelming firepower. The effect is devastating, both physically and psychologically. On the battlefield in Ukraine, the Grad has become a recurring sound. That long, terrifying roar as the rockets launch, followed by a wave of explosions, is something soldiers dread. Veterans often say that just hearing the launch alone is enough to cause panic, even before the rockets make impact. The alleged strike in Dnipropetrovsk is linked directly to the Vostok Group, and this name is not new. Since the early days of the invasion, Vostok has been mentioned repeatedly as one of Russia's more active frontline units. Their main task usually revolves around offensive operations, using artillery to break through enemy defenses, suppress positions, and pave the way for ground forces. In Russian media and propaganda, Vostok is often portrayed as tough, disciplined, and capable of handling some of the most difficult missions. That's why whenever they're mentioned in reports, it immediately attracts attention. But Vostok is not only about combat, their image is also a tool of psychological and political warfare. Attaching their name to a claimed success reinforces the narrative of Russian military strength and resilience. As with almost every report in this war, we end up with two very different stories. On one side, Russia says their Grad strike hit a Ukrainian military position, causing major losses. The message is clear: Russian artillery is effective, and their operations are on target. On the other side, Ukraine paints a very different picture. Local officials and media outlets confirm that there was indeed rocket fire in the Dnipropetrovsk region. But the emphasis is on civilian casualties, damaged homes, and destroyed infrastructure. Instead of talking about military positions, the reports describe fires, collapsed buildings, and families forced to flee. This is the fog of war in action. Both sides shape their narratives to fit their goals. Russia highlights military victories, Ukraine highlights civilian suffering. And for the outside world, it becomes a challenge to separate truth from propaganda. So, is Russia's claim true? Right now, there's no independent verification. Typically, analysts rely on satellite imagery or open-source intelligence to confirm such reports. But in this case, there's nothing concrete yet. What we do know is that Dnipropetrovsk has been hit by Grad rockets multiple times throughout the war. That's not in dispute. The question is whether this particular strike actually destroyed a Ukrainian military position, or whether it mostly caused damage elsewhere. Until independent evidence surfaces, the truth remains uncertain, lost in the haze of war. If the claim is accurate and a Ukrainian staging area was destroyed, the impact could be significant. Temporary positions are often used to regroup troops, prepare logistics, or rotate units. Losing such a spot disrupts coordination and lowers morale. But here's the catch. The Grad is not a precision weapon. Every time it's fired, the the risk of hitting civilian areas is extremely high, especially in regions close to towns and villages. That's why it's been widely criticized as a weapon that blurs the line between military target and civilian tragedy. Psychologically, though, the Grad is incredibly effective. The terrifying sound, the sheer volume of rockets, and the unpredictability of where they'll land. It all adds up to fear and chaos. Soldiers often describe the experience as nerve-shattering. This is one of the reasons Russia continues to rely on it, despite its age. For civilians in Dnipropetrovsk, this is nothing new. The region has endured repeated rocket attacks, leaving homes destroyed, schools damaged, and hospitals struggling to operate. In some villages, almost no one is left, as families have evacuated to escape the constant threat. Every time a Grad barrage rains down, it doesn't just hit soldiers. It also impacts ordinary people who are trying to survive daily life in a war zone. And that's where the tragedy becomes clear. Even if Russia insists they're targeting military assets, the reality on the ground is that civilians are paying the highest price. So did the Vostok Group really destroy a Ukrainian military position in Dnipropetrovsk with their Grad launchers? At this point, we just don't know. What we do know is that Grad strikes have hit the region, and the damage, whether to military forces or civilians, is real. This story highlights the dual nature of modern warfare. On one hand, Russia frames the narrative as military success. On the other, Ukraine shows the world the human cost. And somewhere in between lies the truth, hidden by propaganda and the fog of war. Dnipropetrovsk stands as yet another example of how one location can be both a strategic battleground and a humanitarian disaster zone. As long as the war continues, the roar of Grad rockets will likely keep echoing across the skies, leaving behind destruction, fear, and unanswered questions.